Call this board meeting to order. All members are present. If we can all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Jennifer. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Agenda is approved. Comments and requests from visitors. Is there anyone who would like to comment? Just a note, I think we did try to get the technology fixed. So hopefully we are live streaming. If that didn't work and you're watching the YouTube video, please get the district office know for next week. Item 5, consent items. Anything that people want to move, otherwise a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Lynn. Second by Shannon. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to action items. Item letter A. Construction final change order. So we have Bob. Yep. You want to come forward and let us know what's going on?
Yeah, well, as everybody knows, we started school. The punch list is 99% complete. We still have to do some training of staff as far as doing that to understand the air handlers and the sprinkler system and so forth. There's boys and girls bathroom. There's a 3-foot chunk of base that needs to go that they had on back order for that. And what we have in front of you today is a change order, the final change order to finish all the miscellaneous stuff that was on the list for a total of $31,453. I can kind of give you a recap of what some of those items are. The first item was for the power changes. The power company wanted the CT cabinet moved over to the pole. So originally we had the wire, but they wanted the relocation of the power to there, so that was the cost of $35.20. Actually, item 2, you approved the change order at the very beginning for demoing those sockets, but that never got onto paper. Item 3, as they're taking down the ceiling, they're running ductwork up into that ceiling fix. There were miscellaneous conduits that had to be relocated, meaning the conduit was running up in the ceiling. Those had to be moved and adjusted so that it wasn't interfering with the ductwork. We didn't know those are there until you start running the ductwork into those spaces. Say when we took down the ceiling in the boiler room area, there was one heat detector that had to be relocated. Item ECO8 for $419, that was an exit sign. There's a special ed room that's in the corner that we moved the door to the opposite side of the room so that they wouldn't have to go into that fenced area that was created for the air handlers. Third-party testing, that rather than going a proposal through the district, the contractor contacted Ron, because the welding has to be inspected by a third independent party. Additional soffit framing. If you walk through the school, the back areas where the libraries are and all that, we originally were going to put ceiling tile that would come down and around that ductwork. The soffit work that they did was so good that we got a number to put Park's office and paint on that dark gray. That's what that number is related to. Plumbing changes, the major number there is for, as we were working, we found asbestos in some of the piping. It was to take that, they took the asbestos out, and some of the asbestos that they took out, it's cheaper for them to cut the 2 pieces, take the piece with the asbestos. This was to put that back together. Final duct, it looked good when it went up there. It actually had an industrial look, so there was a credit of $750 not to paint it. Brick, as we moved around the building, they changed the color. Cold corrections, the biggest item on there is when we moved the door, you have 3 doors on that side that's over by the, coming in towards the air handlers. And when you walk out of those doors, there's a step down. And today's code won't let us, so when we put a new door in, you're just matching that sidewalk, you can't step down according to the new code. You have to have a level landing on the side. So they have to basically pour a new one, which will help in the situation because it puts you, brings anybody you want that one to the main sidewalk. That's the major cost for that one. And the QDUC and access panels, the code official came by and we had already put access panels for electrical. They had required that they want additional set of access doors so that when you put coils, you're ever doing work in the future on the air handlers. And all those total of $31,453. That puts your total contract when done will be $1,664,333.68. And that, there is no other things coming, there is no other surprises. They are basically, like I said, 99% complete. And that will be your final cost of the contract. Questions?
So it looks like a little under 10% was changed. Is that pretty standard for a project, or a little higher or
A
lower?
little higher than normal, but there was a lot of surprises in there. When we took the biggest surprises when we took on the series and what was above that. And then some of the things when we added the fence around the air handlers and things like that weren't really job related. They were, as we had a contract to do, it made sense to do some of that stuff. Usually we're going to want to be in that 7 and 8 and a half, so we're a little bit higher than that because of some older things that we wanted to do because we haven't been doing.
Scott, your estimation and how long is the system going to last for that school?
How long will it last for that school?
Yeah.
Well, the existing one was there 30 plus years. The air handler, there's no reason it isn't going to be, and the lighting is LED lighting. The other part that's still going to come is we're working with the contractor on rebates. Because when you switch out those lights, there's a decent size rebate that will come for electrical. Also for the gas, by switching the air handlers out, there'll be a rebate system. And they're working on getting that documentation. They'll run that through us. We'll run it through you and Brent and get those rebates.
Can I ask another question? Do you mind? So I know when we, and Brent too, but I know that when we were kind of grouping these bigger projects together, both Richmond and the parking lot, I recall kind of the general strategy was we're going to start with these 2 bigger projects and kind of see where we end, because we hadn't yet fully anything gone up with bids at that point. And so where are we kind of at in those funds? And, you know, I know that some of this, you know, digging into an old building, some of these costs are expected and some of it's a little bit of smoke creep, which is okay.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious where that puts us.
There's about $300,000 left after the projects are all done in that construction investment account. The secondary parking lot was actually a much larger project than we first initially bid it out at because we put all those extra spots on the end. So it's really the secondary parking lot that has the biggest amount of overage for us on the project. The HVAC one is pretty close.
And tomorrow we're going to, the district's going to receive bids on air conditioning, adding air conditioning to the people in the life. There's quotes that are due tomorrow that we're going to look at. Figured it wasn't a rush this fall.
Any other questions? Otherwise, is there a motion to approve the second amount of $31,433.68? Motion by Lynn,
Second.
seconded by Jennifer. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Change order is approved.
Thank you.
For the detail. Okay. Item B, audit report. So I think the presentation is going to be the virtual. Yeah, virtual. So we will do a copy of the PowerPoint in front of you.
Hey man, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, are you getting like feedback or are you good? Because you are microphone over the whole room.
Oh, no, I'm not getting any feedback.
Okay.
So we're good?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for giving me some time tonight to go over the results of our audit. Is my slideshow moving?
No. Try again.
Well, that's odd.
Something happened.
How about now?
There it is.
All right, good. Okay, so our ultimate responsibility as your auditors is to issue our independent auditor's report on your financial statements. And we are issuing an unmodified opinion, which is the best that we as your auditors can offer. Basically indicates that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects based on the results of our audit. So a clean opinion, if you will. And then in addition to that letter, we have several other communications, and I'd like to go through those. First of all, we issue a report in accordance with government auditing standards. Because you are a school district, Minnesota state statutes outline that we follow these standards, and it requires us to take a closer look at your internal control and then compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grants. And based on the procedures that we completed, we did have the one internal control finding, the significant deficiency related to the lack of segregation of accounting duties. So this is the same finding that you've been receiving for a number of years, as long as I've worked with the district. But to note is that it's a middle level finding. So we have 3 buckets that we put our findings in, and this is the middle one, the significant deficiency. So less severe than a material weakness would be, but still does warrant some attention. The district does have several mitigating controls in place that allow us to put it here. And then the next report that we issue has to do with federal programs and funding that you received. So we completed what's called a single audit, and we tested this year your child nutrition program. And we're issuing an unmodified opinion on compliance related to the test work we completed, and also no internal control findings related to that. So all good there. And then the last official report we have is a report on Minnesota legal compliance. And this is a report that covers 7 broad categories of legal compliance as outlined by the Office of the State Auditor. And we had one finding this year, and it related to the sale of surplus property. There was an instance where the rules were not all followed related to wrestling maps. And then we have a communication letter, and in that communication letter there are several components. First of all is a required communication, and these are things that our standards require us to put in writing to you as the governing board. It would be our tool if we had any difficulties or disagreements with management, or if we uncovered anything significant or unusual, and I'm happy to report that we had none of that. Then we have a legislative summary that talks about what's going on at the state of Minnesota, and also an emerging issue related to new accounting standards. So good light reading for you in the back of that document. And then the financial analysis, which is where I'd like to spend my time tonight. So first of all, taking a look at your general education formula allowance. So general education aid is your largest funding source, so I think it's important to notice the components of the calculation of that aid. So first of all, the formula allowance, the per pupil number amount that you get. And if we key into 2020, you can see you received a 2% increase, which is what you've been receiving and what you're anticipating for fiscal 21 as well. And the other part of the calculation has to do with student count. So we have several charts and graphs to take a look at both your residents and your students served for the Rocori district. And the first chart takes a look at your residents. So you can see for the first time in the 4 years or the 5 years that we're looking at, you actually had an increase in your residents. It was small, but you did increase by about 12 students after decreasing the previous 4 years. And the very line of this chart shows ADM served. So these are the students that were actually served within your district rather than those above that actually reside in your district. And those we'll take a look at weighted, which is how we actually calculate the general education aid. And this chart just takes a look at those same resident ADM numbers in a little different format. So you can see that you did decrease from 2017 to 2019 and then just had a very small increase for 2020. Next chart takes a look at those numbers and weights them by grade level. So you can see the weighting factors on the top there, a 1.0 for all grades with the exception of secondary at 1.2. And then we have the middle chart that starts out with your residents. You can see that small increase there. And then we factor in open enrollment. And you had positive trends in both components of the open enrollment. So you had fewer students going elsewhere, about 7 less. And then you had more students coming in from elsewhere, and that went up about 97. So your overall net gain went from 354 students in 2019 all the way to 458 students in 2020. So that contributed to the overall increase of 114 kids that you are paid that general education aid on. One last chart that takes a look at well, actually, there's one more, but this is the last one that takes a look at that specific information. And it shows your resident served versus your non-resident served. And you can see that top portion of the bar has been growing since 2017. And those are the non-residents. And for 2020, that made up almost 24% of the total population that is served in your buildings. Here we have one last chart that takes a look at your students and the changes. The blue on the left is the resident ADMs, and then the green on the right is your ADM served. So you can see that although you had decreases in the residents for 4 out of the 5 years, you had increases in the students served for 4 out of the 5 years due to that open enrollment. Then moving on to actual dollar amounts, first of all taking a look at your general fund sources of revenue. Overall, revenues were up just under 6%, or about $1.5 million for the year, and most of that came in the state source category. That number is up about $1.3 million. And several components going into that. First of all, that 2% formula allowance increase. Secondly, the increase in the students that you served, and then also an overall increase in the state special education aid. When we take a look at that same information in a little bit different format, you can see the heavy reliance that the district has on the state aids. The middle portion of this chart here, which is by far the largest, makes up about 80%, and that is all coming from state sources. Down on the bottom is your local property taxes at $3.7 million, about 14%, and then up on top is other sources, which includes federal funding and other local revenues at about 6%. All right, switching gears then to the expenditures, we're showing 2 pie charts that show you 2019 and 2020, and the functions or programs where you're spending your money. Overall, expenditures were up about 2.5% or $600,000, so not a big increase. And the categories very, very consistent from year to year. If we look at the instructional categories, that's by far where you're spending the most of your money. It was 63% for 2020 and 62% for 2019. So that's the special education, vocational instruction, and regular instruction combined together. The next couple of slides take a look at your revenues and expenditures and then compare them to some statewide averages on a per student served basis. So in this slide you see overall statewide on the top, districts with similar enrollment in the middle, and then the Rocori school district on the very bottom. And we have comparatives through 2019, and you can see that you have been consistently below overall statewide averages and districts of a similar size, although closer definitely closer to the districts of similar size. For 2020, this number did go up with that increase in the revenues offset by the increase in the students served. So up about 1.2% compared to the 6% in revenue increase. And then if we look at the expenditures per student, you see a very similar trend here, which makes sense. You can't spend what you don't receive. So below that statewide average, which is the green bar on the left, also below districts of a similar size, the blue bar in the middle, and then Rocori being on the far right. When we look at Rocori from 2019 to 2020, you'll see a different trend here. It actually decreased. And that has to do with the small increase that you saw in your expenditures and the larger increase in the students that you served. This next slide takes a look at the general fund budget to actual results. It kind of pulls the whole fund together for us. So if we look at the original budget, you had anticipated that your fund balance or your revenues would be under your expenditures by about $117,000. You did modify that budget, anticipating that there would be an excess of revenues, about $97,000, and then you outperformed that budget and had an excess of revenues of about $1 million, just over $1 million. And when we look into the reasons for that, if you go back up to the top, to the revenues, you can see that those were under budget by about $115,000. That's a 0.4% variance, so really very, very close to what you had anticipated. And the largest variance comes in that other local and county revenues. And that had a lot to do with the COVID-19 situation that we're still dealing with. Ticket sales were down, gate receipts were down, and student activities revenues were down as well. When we look at the expenditure side of things, those were significantly under budget, about 3.9%. The largest categories being regular instruction, first of all, and that had to do with fewer salaries for the year related to the COVID-19 that we already talked about, and then sites and buildings also under budget by about $293,000. A lot of that had to do with fewer utilities and costs related to the buildings being empty in the spring, and then also the roofing project, you had anticipated in the budget that would be further along than it was for the year. The next chart takes a look at the general fund again, very high level, showing 5 years of operations. And when we key in again to 2020, you'll see that 6% increase in revenues, 2.5% increase in expenditures. So excess revenues of just over $1 million, like we saw on the budget chart. And then you see a transfer out. $204,000 was transferred to the Community Service Fund to help cover school readiness and ECFE shortfalls. So you'll see the fund balance as of July 1st, and right below that you'll see something new this year. This is a change in accounting principle. You'll see an increase of $118,782, and that is the student activity funds. They were brought under board control starting July 1st of 2019, so they brought in beginning cash balances of that amount. The second portion of the chart takes a look at your fund balance. We start with the non-spendable. Those are things that have already been paid, so the money has left the building but will be expensed in future years. Then you have restrictions. Those are state mandated. Funding streams, committed for separation and retirement benefits, and then some assignments that you locally decided you're going to spend your money on. And finally, unassigned, second number up from the bottom. And you did see a pretty good increase in your unassigned number, increased about $506,000, and sits at about 5.6% of the operating budget. So still below your 6 to 8% fund balance policy range. So headed in the right direction, but still a little ways to go. And one last fund balance chart takes a look at the unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of unrestricted expenditures. So the fund balance that we're looking at here includes the unassigned, the assigned, the committed, and the non-spendable, and the expenditures have been adjusted to remove anything that has a restricted funding source. This is what the state uses to calculate statutory operating debt, and it gives us a tool so that we can compare Rocori's district to others around the state. And when we look at that, you see the increase that you experienced in 2020, but you see that you are significantly below the overall statewide average for 2019 and prior. The statewide average has been hovering around 20%, and you've been in that 8 to 10% range. A couple more slides. First of all, your food service fund. Both revenues and expenditures were down in this fund, really related to the fewer amounts served related to COVID-19 and the shutdowns that we had. We did have excess revenues of about $2,900, so pretty close to breaking even for this fund, and pretty consistent fund balance. When you look at the bottom there, you'll see that restricted fund balance not straying very far from 2017 all the way to 2020, pretty consistent operations. And then the last fund is your community service fund, and you did have increased revenues and expenditures in this fund related to taking over the kids care program for the Boys and Girls Club for the year. You did have excess expenditures this year for the second year in a row, and then you'll see that transfer in from the general fund. So ending the year at 111 in fund balance, and the bottom part shows you the breakdown of that fund balance, and you can see that all components with the exception of school readiness are positive for the end of 2020. And that is what I have. Does anyone have questions?
I was just hoping we could maybe highlight the difference between the operational fund balance and the general fund balance, because that statistic wasn't in the presentation, this handout, but I think it's important for people who are maybe watching to know the difference, because that 10.8 is significantly for the unassigned versus the operational. Do you understand my question?
So Jason is asking about the calculation on the SOD versus our unassigned fund balance that we have and our percentage for that. I don't know if Nancy's
No, I couldn't hear him. So what was the specific question?
So the difference between the SOD calculation from MDE and
Oh,
on your
sure.
chart versus our unassigned fund balance target that we have.
Yeah, so your unassigned fund balance is 1.5 million, and compared to your operating budget, that's a 5.6% set aside, if you will. And then for the SOD calculation, we add in the assigned numbers. So you have several of those listed on slide 16, the committed for separation and retirement benefits, and then also the non-spendable items. So that's a larger number. And then what the state does is they pull out all of the restricted expenditures. So anything that you're spending on long-term facilities, maintenance, operating capital, student activities, those things are pulled out of the calculation. So your unassigned is compared to your total operating budget. That number is compared to the unrestricted expenditures, and that's why it's higher. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can I ask a question? I have a question about, so I'm looking at page 17. So
Anything else?
Yep, just a second. Kara has a question and I'll relate it to you.
Okay.
So just looking at the difference between Rocori Schools' general fund financial, or the general fund balance, the 10.8, compared to the state is 19.9. And I'm just curious if there's any like nuance in that data regarding like size of school, or a little bit more understanding on why Rocori Schools has such a large gap.
Yep, so Nancy on page 17, obviously Rocori's number looks a lot lower there, and Kara is wondering about why some of our other districts in the state are so much higher.
I would say part of the reason is a lot of districts, especially the smaller ones, have a higher fund balance, and they have higher fund balance policies. We see a lot of ranges from 10 to 15 as a goal, where you're at 6 to 8%, so they're trying to achieve a higher fund balance. Some of them also use those assigned fund balances. I mean, you have quite a few, but some districts use those even more to set aside for future projects or curriculum needs, or technology needs, those types of things. So there's really no way to know exactly why it's higher, and it's difficult without digging into all the details. But we're providing it just as a comparison, something to look at.
Is there any correlation between the size of the school district and the size of the fund balance? Because from other large districts I've seen, I don't see a lot of them having as big a balance?
Yeah, there definitely is. When we get into northern Minnesota and some of the very, very small districts, they have a much higher fund balance because they need to. They aren't able to weather the ups and downs in the revenue streams because they don't have as much coming in on a consistent basis, if that makes sense. So they definitely, and if they had, one boiler go out or, something go wrong with the HVAC system, they need something to be able to weather that, where it's a little bit easier for a larger district to maintain a smaller fund balance. So that's why the fund balance policy is important. So whatever you think is an appropriate level based on your operations should be your goal. Yeah, and we're in no way saying this is where you should be. We're just saying this is where you are.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening.
Item C, yeah.
We have to.
Oh, we have to. Sorry.
I'll make a motion to accept the audit for
Motion by Sunny,
Second.
second by Kara. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The audit is accepted as presented. Okay, item letter C. Preliminary levy.
So page 199 is a pickup from the MDE saying we're actually going to saying certify, and then page 200 is the levy limitation and certifications. Or I have active report because that's when we work in school finance, but that has the comparison to last year. So we always have to do the preliminary levy in September, and you either can do a specific dollar amount or you do the maximum. I would always suggest that we do the maximum. That way when you get to the final, you can always decrease if you want to, if there's certain spots. I believe right now it's at about a 3.8% increase. There are still going to be adjustments to it, especially for things like debt service. There's always some adjustments that happen in there. With our amounts when we get our final numbers in for MDE. So I would suggest tonight that you approve the preliminary levy using the maximum.
Questions for Beth?
I recommend we do that. You can always decrease in December, but you cannot increase, so do something less than that, you cannot increase. So
This is just a standard order of business, so I'm going to approve the preliminary levy. Second.
Motion by Kara, second by Sunny. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Motion approved to approve for the maximum levy. Great. That's good. Item letter D, Pilgrim's tax abatement request.
So Jason, Chair, we have Les and Katie here tonight from Pilgrims. And if there was any questions, I think tonight the ask is to approve the application request for the tax abatement, leaving off the amount of years so that it can be in line with the county and city decision.
So who has approved it, or what's the process for the other?
The county has their hearing on October 6th. The city has already heard it, and they're making their decision on the 13th. As far as how many years that will be. So our next board meeting wouldn't be after the 13th, wouldn't be until 20, I think it's the 28th or 20, so whatever date that is, the 20. So my recommendation is that we approve it tonight, leading off the years, and then once those two entities have made their decision, then I can fill in the years and we can send out the Even less is that, let's do it.
Correct.
Would we approve it with just blank years or up to 15 years?
I think we can approve it with up to 15 years, that's what the city has done, and then we just adjust it, I would just adjust it after that.
you heard about this in greater detail at the previous board meeting. I support, I'd like to support this. I think it's good for our community and ultimately it is good for Rocori schools because of the additional revenue in the future and in both shorter term and longer term will be generating because of this addition. And so because of that, I support approving the tax abatement request. So I move to approve the abatement application as presented. And the years will be set to be consistent with the county and city for the years of the abatement.
I'll second it.
Motion by Kara, second by Rick. Any further discussion? And I think this is a resolution, so we need a roll call vote. Jennifer?
Aye.
Aye.
Jason, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Resolution is approved for the property tax abatement for buildings. Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Item E, Minnesota State High School bill. This was a bill from last time that was pulled up in second discussion, and it's back on the agenda for tonight. The State High School, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that this is for the annual membership. This is not for the COVID installments, so this is for the activities that are currently going and then will be going to the year. As I said, this bill is part of our annual membership fees that include insurance, us being able to participate against other member schools, and any bowl season, state tournament type things that could happen in the future. So I do believe it's important for us to pay this bill. The second part of the larger part of the bill is an ongoing discussion as well.
So, Brad, just to clarify for everybody, that bill that we're paying in was a 57% increase. So the reason we pulled it out is because that went up significantly for schools. We also did not get any services last spring, which we were not credited for. On top of the fact that the high school league supports the state tournaments. At this point in time, there will be no state tournaments this year. So just understand that, I'm okay with us propping them up. But I can tell you, the journey that I've gone through in the last month and a half, the fact that, we go from looking into what they're doing to being able to have football and volleyball back should tell you how poorly things are going for them. Because you can't just be a parent and a coach stomping your feet and football comes back. So I'd love to think I have that much power, but that's not the case. So there are a lot of things, that are wrong right now. And luckily, the right thing happened, and our kids are going to get some of those opportunities back. But to clarify one thing, the season, the conference season, the section season, everything that we do is not funded by the state high school league. Once again, they help to support the licensing that our officials and our coaches should go through. They support those platforms. I'm not sure what they put in for money because there's probably some dues that are paid. And they also support the state tournaments. So there's going to be a long-term effect to what's going to happen. And this fee that they're looking at charging us, which is another $9,000, fees don't typically go away when you give money to a nonprofit association that the members are belonging to. So my journey is going to be done here in about 3 months. I would say you stay very in tune because we're not the only school that's struggling with how this whole thing was handled. The lack of transparency, the lack of leadership, the lack of direction. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. And I think that is pretty easy to see throughout what happened in the last month and what's happening now and what they didn't do and the amount of work that individuals had to put in to help them understand the data, to help them understand what's important for kids, to help them understand what schools need, to help them look at the fact that some schools are different than other schools. Again, it could go on forever. And I had no idea that this is how they functioned. And it was a great lesson for me because if people don't use their words and speak, we wouldn't be where we're at right now in Minnesota for our kids when it comes to volleyball and football. So I would just be very careful. I think Brad's right, we don't have a choice, but understand that if we don't look at how they're gonna function in a different light, we're just gonna keep throwing money at them, and again, we have to make sure as a member we're getting what we think we should be getting from them. So that's my 2 cents on that. Just want to be clear. Yes, that is the membership fee, but that is almost double, well not double, 57% more than it would have, what it was in the past.
And I think there was a question about if we could pay per season. We did reach out to Eric Martins at the high school, did not, and Lynn is assistant, I did not respond to that. But I did speak with the chair of the board of directors, and he felt like that there would be, he didn't feel like that was a viable option to AIC.
Did he say why?
He did not. Any other questions or discussion?
No, there's still, I mean, the member meeting is the petition that was started in, on behalf of the members. That, let's say it's on the back burner, but again, we're only one member, so if 50 members decide they want to have a meeting to discuss things like this and how it should happen, that's still something that could happen in the future. That's going to come down to the members and superintendents and boards around the state. But
And is this $9,000, is that going to be needing to be approved separately at what date? I'll have a blue sheet that how,
It's on board book.
it's on,
It
it's in
says in
November.
here, November membership fee to be sent October 15th to November 30th. That's the first COVID-19 installment of $4,500. And then the second one is February membership fee to be sent January 15th to February 21st. So this is the invoice directly from Minnesota State High School League. So they're telling us when we have to send it, when it's due 45 days later? According, like, is that what this is?
There's telling us what it is. I think districts have the option, they want to pay it all up front, but they're saying that this is an installment. This is on their board, but this is on their board of directors meeting for the October 1st, I think, Thursday.
yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of stuff going on October 1st. I mean, one of the things is right now, they're not planning on offering interstate tournaments. So everybody needs to understand, they're not willing to do a state tournament for the activities that started on time, and that is going to be a discussion. The reason why, it costs money. They don't have any money. And again, that, is an issue that we all have to deal with members, but we might need to have to look at the organizational setup, because obviously, you can't predict the COVID, but they could have predicted having a season where they don't have state tournaments because of weather, because of, it could have been anything. So 1 year of not having a basketball state tournament and going into a season where they're not going to have a football state tournament is putting them in this spot. So again, my feeling on that COVID fee, we're not the only district. Let's wait and see what they do on October 1st. If they don't offer tennis, cross country, swimming, volleyball, football, and which one am I missing? One sport in there, there's one other one, tennis, volleyball, soccer. What's that? Soccer. And again, that not all schools have all those activities, but right now they're not planning on offering a state tournament. And so that's part of what the fee that we pay them covers on a traditional basis. So I think October 1st will help us to see what they're planning on doing.
So they all pay the fee, they still aren't going to have a state tournament?
Correct.
Under many circumstances, whether we pay them or don't pay them, we don't have a state tournament.
That is what the answer is at this point. But again, we weren't going to have football and volleyball until, so October 1st, they have a meeting. Brad said, obviously, we're not the only school that has issues with this, and the outstate schools even have a bigger issue because they're paying, anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 with 120 students, compared to Eden Prairie paying $11,000 with, a multiple of 300% higher in students. So I believe that they're gonna look at a per pupil ratio when it comes to a dollar amount, and this dollar amount's gonna get adjusted, but again, I only say that because as we were climbing Mount Everest, it was, you're never gonna have football and volleyball. And lo and behold, you know, we have football and volleyball. So can that number change? Will they look at it more from a per pupil and base it on the amount of kids, 713 kids you have? My guess is they're gonna do that because the smaller schools are getting hit even harder in a percentage standpoint. So,
And so bottom line, as a district, we need to determine how we feel about the way this organization is preparing for situations where their revenue, their events that produce revenue for them to sustain don't happen. Because clearly they didn't have any sort of long-term plan for an event or a state tournament not taking place.
correct.
Because it took a couple of state tournaments and they are about ready to go.
Yeah, I think they were hurting before, but they were able to keep things floating because, you know, you've got revenue coming in. But when they look at the fall, without having football revenue, which is $1 million plus for them in the positive, yeah, that they knew coming this summer that was gonna hurt. You know, and again, back to your question, Jen, again, if they host the other state tournaments, they cost money. And so I think right now, my opinion is they don't want to host any because they can't make enough money to support the ones that they have. Because again, what's the one thing they're not going to be able to have at these state tournaments? Fans. So it doesn't do them any good. You know, they can sell some advertising, but there's no fans. There's not a whole lot to advertise other than streaming them, and that costs money then to stream them. So they have themselves a pickle, let's say. And I would just say that, again, I've only heard, you know, through the last month of talking to people, it's very unlikely that this fee is going away. It can be called COVID, but they have to flip their funding so that the members fund them and not these revenue streams, because as they found out, when the revenue streams go away, they can't function. So they're going to try to find a way to have the members prop them up, and then the revenue streams can either be you know, we're a nonprofit, they're a nonprofit, a dividend back to the members, which would make sense. It's just that it's hurting right now because last year we paid $2,600 in fees, and we're about to go to $14,000. So, yeah, it's just bad timing on their part, maybe partly, because I think they had some funding problems that were going on before COVID. That's just my suspicion.
So it sounds like, as I'm, you know, listening to this, it sounds like there's some goals in regards to the long term and how they're funding themselves, or, you know, how the revenue stream and how they're balancing their books. But then there's also the component of how decisions are being made, who are they accountable, what is the process for input from school districts. And so I'm just curious what the long-term and short-term goals are for those.
Well, I would agree with 100% because this is pure, you know, partly my opinion on what they're doing because of what I've learned, but I think Brad, you would be the transparency from this group has been very important. And that's something that, all those things you just asked, you know, I believe that this is what they're trying to do is flip that revenue. All those other things you just said, 100%. But again, that's going to take members and superintendents around our state deciding that they're going to really look into what this association is about and what they're doing for the members. And again, it's no fault of anybody. It's a group, you know, it's a membership-led group, but there still is an executive board that are full-time employees that have to be directed by the members. And so in a time like this, when your members are the board of directors, and the board of directors are so busy with running a school, if you're the superintendent that's the board chair for the high school league, but you also have to take care of the school that's going through this COVID, they may have to look at how they run themselves to some degree, because that was an unbelievable task on those board members because they had their own schools to worry about. So I mean, I could go on and on about why this organization faltered and failed in this, but it's not my job, but I can tell you that, again, a couple parents down on their feet when they got volleyball and football back. So you need to understand that it was, I mean, they did not function properly in time of crisis. And
I think what Shannon said to her in an earlier conversation I had is that the MSHSL is going through a reimagining process. I think that's a good word that Shannon came up with.
it's kind of, yeah, reimagining, or you guys.
Reimagining process, of which, Kara, to your question, superintendents are definitely now watching this. Right now, there's not a superintendent that is dedicated on the board. It just so happens that Mr. Novak, who is a superintendent, got on through an election process, through his region, and superintendents right now are really trying to force their way into saying, you need to have representation of superintendents on this committee, because they're the ones who know the pulse of the memberships in their schools. And so I see that it's coming. I see the high school league listening to their members very closely. I agree with Shannon. They have to do something different with their funding streams. We cannot rely upon U.S. Bank State giving that revenues that place for free forever, so that the money can be made in football. Hockey is a huge revenue source. We have to find a decision. I don't know how it's going to be. That's for decisions someone first. Tonight's decision is really just making sure that we are a member of the state high school league for this year. We can have further discussions on what that COVID fee looks like after October 1st. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, is there a motion to approve the membership fee minus the COVID installment?
So the 53.53?
Correct.
All right, I move to approve the August invoice total for $5,353 for the Kinston State High School League.
Motion by Kara. Second by Lynn. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item letter F. ALC handbook. Yep, this is back for the final reading, final review. There were no questions after last time. We did look into, I think the question was, why are some of the areas a little more vague? And that's just so we have a little more interpretation for students. They're at the ALC for different reasons, and so they just can't apply general policies or discipline policies over because they do have to try to work with getting those students through. So that's why it's okay. I recommend that we approve this, and that's again will be part of the handbook process in the future. Motion to approve. Motion by Lynn. Second by Shannon. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The handbook is approved. Item G, resolution to approve and authorize the execution of the master lease purchase agreement.
I'm just gonna talk from over here because it's easier, thanks. So because the lease was so big this time around, we had to have our bond council sign off on it, and they wanted something more formal for the resolution that we approved it. So essentially it says everything we did at the last meeting is signed. They just want a formal resolution like this to approve it, and then they have to sign off on the lease agreements for us. So I just ask that you approve this tonight.
Any questions for Beth?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution, say it, authorizing the execution of the master lease purchase agreement.
Motion by Sunny to approve the lease agreement.
Second.
Second by Kira. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Jennifer?
Aye.
Ellen? Lynn? Aye. Jason? Aye. Kira?
Aye.
Sunny?
Aye.
Aye. Resolution is approved. And next item is item H, approval of payment to Cold Spring Bakery.
I'll make a motion to approve check to Gold Crane Bakery for $56.43.
Second.
Second by Kara, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Then abstains. Motion approved. Discussion items. Letter A, strategic plan update. I got this document here from Bruce Miles about 4:30 this afternoon. Sorry, it's not off the press. So if you looked at the documents that were presented, the first vision was kind of wordy. It had a number of different bulleted points in it. And so I asked Bruce to try to put this down into a vision for us statement. It is not there yet, we understand that, but I thought to share this with you tonight. It does need to be memorialized, in my opinion. But these are the start of a vision statement, and then those priorities or mission that we would be working on going forward. Again, this is just for your view for tonight. And again, I hope to have this to you on Friday. Unfortunately, it didn't come until February. Any other questions for Brad on this? I think that we will definitely need, to keep that. I'm wondering about, we have that mission, making a difference today to create a better tomorrow. Is that part of this work? I assume to sort of have like some succinct statements.
Yes, that's some of the work we're working on right now, so yeah, it's a same statement.
And then, do we have a sort of a timeline for sort of getting this finalized so that we can sort of have an idea as to what we're going to expect?
Yeah, so in thinking about that, we do have a work session in the next one, and I'd really like to see us have the statement finalized at the end of the work session. That's the I'm sorry, 14th, right, of October? Is that our next board meeting, 12th? That is part of our work sessions, usually the first meeting, and we would like to have that finalized. And approved in the second meeting in October, so we can move forward.
So the sooner that we've got some maybe new stuff to share with the board, I think we can get that to us so that we can try to generate ideas and suggestions so that that can be effective. If you have anything prior to the work session though, there's some suggestions on that, please feel free to send them to me. We're more than willing to take your input. And this is, you're going to meet with the administrative team on this. They haven't seen this yet, so my plan is to have this sent out tomorrow. I was hoping we'd have it before our 1 o'clock meeting this afternoon, just in time. So, any other questions on the strategic plan at this point, or any other requests going into the next meeting? Okay, and then item B, parent survey information. I did put in the packet tonight the back-to-school surveys for our students, staff, and parents. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. If you haven't, please do. I'm planning on sending out the parent tomorrow. If you have any suggestions or improvements for the surveys. The parent survey, just ask, what school does your students say? I do also want you to know that we are asking where the survey is going to be anonymous. We don't need your name attached to it. It does ask them to fill out one per student because we all know that every student is having a different experience. We ask them what their grades in. We ask them to rank their fall entrance conference. And then some feedback, so they have some ideas for us to improve on our fall entrance conferences.
And then we have a branch question. So if you are in the online or using Edgenuity and you answer to that yes, it takes you to different branches. If you're in the in-person, so you're in in-person hybrid, and that takes you to different branches and questions. And then if you are a pre-K 6, it takes you to a different set of branches. So it's basically asking them what it's been like so far this first month of school. The questions behind that. What's going well? What do you need assistance with? How's your access? What does the schoolwork look like on the off day? Those types of things.
I just had a comment on the school on the off day. I think just providing a little more guidance, so someone like a parent like me would be able to give you a better answer on number 15. It says, when your students spend the appropriate amount of time on schoolwork on their off-campus day, what do I characterize as appropriate? I'm looking at myself, I've got an 8th grader, 6th grader, 4th grader. So obviously the two little ones are in school every day, but as an 8th grader, is there a guideline, like middle school should be 1 to 2 hours a day? I'm just making things up. And high school should be a certain type number of hours per day? I don't know how to answer that.
Or even if you were, if you weren't to necessarily define it by time, you could define it by like meaningfulness.
Yeah.
So you could go a different way too, I think. Is there off day meaningful?
Right, or appropriate amount of time, or do they feel, are they being challenged?
Yeah.
Did notice in the branch off questions for navigating online learning, there is a question about what you need spelling assistance with.
Okay.
Kind of so the one right before that is what's going well, I think. But when you get to the in-person and hybrid, there's really not, it asks what's going well, but it doesn't really ask what's not going well. And I feel like that group needs to be able to provide that feedback as well.
So under number 10,
So it's in all of the ones that start with education in the hybrid in-person model.
okay, so that's 10 through 14.
No. I don't know, the one I'm looking at, it's questions, you have 10 through 15.
So
It's like, yeah. There's not the opposite. There's the education hybrid in-person model number 14, what's going well, but there's not an opportunity for them to say what would be approved or what's not working.
I got you.
and then when the question like, are they able to access for hybrid in person? Are they able to access home or their at-home learning? If you're in K6, they're not doing that. So it just seems
Can you develop the questionnaire so that if you pick online school, that it would just give you the online school question?
Yep, so that's what it's been.
Yeah, that's what's already been given, so it's branched out, so if you answer, it won't even ask you some of these questions. Karen, can you just tell me one more time where you are now?
Oh, yeah, here, sorry. Yeah, question 13. Does your student know how to access assignments and resources during their at-home learning? If they're in the hybrid in-person model for K6,
That doesn't apply.
that doesn't apply. But if they're, let's see, but if they're in AB7, yeah, then it doesn't apply. So.
That shouldn't take long for me to get that updated for tomorrow, so that should still be able to be up for tomorrow. Our student survey is Again, we're not really asking our K through 6 because they're in school every day. So we're looking to our 7 through 18 to 21 program. Again, we asked all students to come to entrance conferences, so we want to know if they thought that was a good deal or not. Some feedback on that if they have some. Which model of education are you participating in? And then that goes into a branch question again. Asking about their technology at home, if they have access. Do you know how to get a hold of people you need to get a hold of? What's going well? What do you need assistance with? And then that branches down to your education hybrid in-person model. Do you have your materials? Do you feel safe? Are you getting the appropriate amount of social and emotional support? Do you have access to your assignments when you're at home?
I would make the same comment on here. Again, they have the option on number 13 to answer what's going well, but they don't have the option to provide input on what's not working. And then to, I think, to Jennifer's point, it might help them answer 14 if they have an idea of how much time they should be spending.
Okay, timeline and the timeline guidance, right, Jennifer? That's what it was.
Just a general guideline, because that would cause a parent maybe to pause if their student's spending way more time than that, or not spending anywhere near that amount of time. Just have a benchmark of what should a parent expect. None of us have ever done this before, so that's
How many don't have them, but last thing ever.
And challenge, right? Timeline.
yeah, they challenge.
And then our staff survey, where are you working at? And this is going to all staff and again, it's anonymous. Where's your name? What building? What do you typically do? Conferences? Any feedback? How are we doing as a district? What's going well? What needs to be improved? Very short, but for our staff, but more narrative. It really all kind of ties together with strategic planning too, and seeking input and communicating with our communities. Thank you for your feedback on that. Appreciate that. We'll get those updated and we'll get that going. Letter A, superintendent report. All right. A few items to report on tonight. The first is it enrollment? So you saw in the packet tonight the new enrollment forms, and you can see on the far left there's the grades, and then there's the COVID class cap. So the board asked for the information the last time about where we are as far as students and how many more students will we take in open enrollment. So I want the public to know that even though we're closed open enrollment, we still are open in some grade levels. And here's the capacity that we're at.
Well, so am I reading this right, that looking at the closed grade level column at the far right, we're only closed to 2 grade levels? We're open to everything else?
Correct.
So I think that is a huge statement because the public thinks we're closed enrollment.
And when people call, we try to tell them that we closed enrollment, but we're still open by grade level capacity. That's where we're at.
So how do we,
Communicate that?
how do we make, because I feel like the message was publicized by local media, thank you, that Rocori switched to closed enrollment. And so how do we get the local media to correct that, to say that we are closed enrollment only when we hit capacity, and we are currently not only at capacity at 2 grade levels. And not even 2 grade levels in all of our locations. It's 1 grade level in all locations and 1 grade level only in 1
plan on working on communicating that out to our local media. So as you can see, we do have room in some grade levels, as we just said. You can see how close we are in the other grade levels. So, we can take 2 6th graders, we're full, or no, we can take a few more 7th graders and a few more 8th graders. And then at secondary, because the classes cross over, the 880 is the cap we're at 872. So we can take 8 high school kids, approximately 14 middle school kids, and then 16, probably 16 to 20 is elementary kids. So that was it, like 8th grade as close to. Is that 210? Oh yeah, 210. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong number there.
So just 6th and 7th grade.
Just 6th and 7th grade would take the lead. So the message needs to go out is, there are openings, please call the building that your potential students, and we're taking applications, and then we approve them, we look at them on a Wednesday or Thursday basis, and then we call those families back and say we're ready for it.
And this is changing all the time, so.
Changing all the time. Especially, we've had a student go to homeschool as of late as of 9:15. So we still see students who are choosing to homeschool now. Welcome to the target that moves constantly. But this is a good report, Holly. Thank you for adding that COVID class cap and keeping due vigilance on this for us. I appreciate it. Other reports. Joel Baumgarten gave me an update on the field. Unfortunately, the excavators broke down today, so they couldn't excavate today, but they were working on it. As of when school started, Kramer Trucking and Excavating built their bridge on September 17th. On September 22nd, the earthwork had begun. And as you can see, they're about just a little over halfway done. So they've taken all the black dirt and then some of the fill down to the base where we had done our soil borings to make sure that we had water displacement. And you can see that they are filling it back up with sand. Once that sand is packed, they'll bring in some crushed granite. That sprint turf will be there, hoping for an October 15th delivery of the sprint turf and installation, with the target date of completion is October 30th. So that is the update on the field. I've been taking pictures on that, just to kind of have a little visual of that.
But just so everybody knows, and we're hoping to play our final 3 games on that of the season, so our home games will be on that field, which will be amazing.
Yeah. Let's see, other reports. COVID update. So for our county numbers, this last week, on Thursday, were released, and it looks like we're still in works for hybrid. We are to have a meeting on Wednesday night for an EPTT meeting. That meeting is going to be postponed. I have a doctor's appointment for my left eye on Wednesday, but there's really nothing new to report because our numbers have stayed, at least at this point, with our decision in the hybrid model. So that's good news for us. I am a little worried over the weekend the county numbers went up quite a bit, so we'll have to see how that affects us after coming out of MEA. Stay tuned for that.
What does the state talk about as far as county and district numbers, and how are they moving towards what is all distance learning and what is not. I mean, they talked about changing their target at all as we, learned that, yes, case rates are going to go up, but hospitalizations and deaths of school-age kids are not going up. Are they adjusting that so that we can try to be consistent, even if, we hit that threshold? Is there any consistent meaning staying in school in a hybrid model?
Yeah. They have not moved off of the bands, so that 10, 20.
What is our per 10,000 in Stearns County before we activate? What's the threshold for distance learning?
30 is the threshold, and we're at 17 this last set.
And is there a plan that we have maybe started to look at from again, spreading ourselves out and being able to stay in the hybrid model? Again, not to rehash our nightmare from the beginning of the year, but we have a better plan. Have we looked at getting that to the state so that if for some reason we got the 30, our hybrid model of distancing ourselves even more would be able to keep us on this everyday schedule every other day?
So I'm currently meeting with those space owners. I had my meeting with the theater. I have my meeting with Peace Lutheran. This Wednesday, I have my meeting with Danny Curran at River of Life. So that'll be all finalized. We'll be able to look and see what we can do for having students in those spaces. At the theater, I think it'll be difficult to have class, like an elementary class there, or 6th, 7th, 8th grade class there, but I think we could have lecture style classes there. At Peace Lutheran, just north of space, I believe it would be a potential for some of our early childhood classes to go there, which then would take some of our potentially our community ed classes out, and then so that we could bring more upper level students here. I have not seen the River of Life shade space other than the coffee or the firehouse room, so I don't know anything about that space.
So hypothetically, I don't know if this is true, but Buffalo, I believe, was in maybe this spot or some school where, like you're talking about this spike that might happen for a week that puts Stearns County, we'll say, at 31. But based on the data after that and based off of what we see, most likely it's going to go back below that 30. Is the state going to look at us, not putting a school upside down for 1 week and making us have to figure out how to go to distance learning? Oh, it's, just kidding, you go back there every other day. So are we being reasonable when looking at that and not forcing the school to do something traumatic for one?
Yeah, I believe they are, in the fact that they put these, what we call these regional support teams in place. So our regional support team is through Resource Training Solution. And so they're actually asking us not to do the real world and to use trends to make sure that they're making good decisions for our families to be consistent as possible. So we're looking at 3 data points rather than just an every other week data point. So they're really trying to help us in making sure that we are consistent for our families.
Right, so what I'm hearing you say is that they wouldn't drive us to distance learning if that trend would appear as if we had this little spike that maybe put it at that 30.
I think it would depend on where the cases are coming from. So if I could say to our regional support team, hey, the county is going high, but our numbers right now, our district are pretty good. Can we stay in the same model that we are because we're showing that it is working here? I think the answer to that question is yes. We would be able to make that case.
Right, because it's highly unlikely that we're going to stay distance learning, again, other than a terrible crisis that would happen. So I would hope that we would be able to build a case that we don't want to distance learning for 2 weeks and then back to,
We really don't want to do that. You're right. I'll just say it again, and I'll say it again to parents tomorrow. The best way for us to stay in school is to follow social distancing guidelines. Wear your mask in public. Wash your hands. Stay home if you're sick. That is how we continue to do our learning so that our cases do not go high and our kids can stay active in their activities. It is a community effort that's going to take for us to stay session.
I mean, we can ask the state all those questions, but I really think the responsibility is on each of us as individuals.
And again, that's awesome. I just want to know what the situation is if it happens. I just want to make sure we know what our options are if this were to happen. I mean, obviously, we know all those things. We can't control them all. So what are we going to do if it gets there? And are we asking to make sure, and it sounds like we are, asking those questions.
I'm in communication with our regional sport team and Sally Sands, at the public county health in Stearns County every week to make sure that they know where we are and we know where we are situation-wise.
And every school in Stearns County is in the same boat.
Every
Is it
school,
not?
same, Stearns County is in the same boat. Okay. I think that's it. Unless there's any other questions from board members? Okay. Board reports, if we could have Emily do a little student report, that'd be great.
In Student Senate, as of currently, we have our new board members elected. And we're just brainstorming possible activities that we can do in place of homecoming, different dress-up days or activities, and then we are currently looking at the possibility of doing a blood drive.
I believe the blood drive is being scheduled for October 29th and 30th. That's the current dates. Okay? Thank you. Jennifer?
The only committee of mine that was a technology committee, I was not able to attend, so I don't have any reports from you.
I can give a quick update.
Would you? Yeah.
We have separated out the policy pieces from the user one-to-one agreement, and the policy from the actual user agreement, so that is now separate. The first week in October, you will see the new policy separate additions, and then the user guide is now walked through its committee, will be brought to the next tech committee, and then will be for your review. Probably something you won't have to approve, because it's just talking about how kids are going to use their laptops and their devices, but the AUP will be updated, and that is what you'll see for them.
Thank you.
Kara?
My committees haven't met. Stearns Family Collaborative meets Wednesday, and I will be attending via Zoom.
Sunny?
My committees have not met.
Shannon?
We talked about this.
The only one that we had a Zoom meeting from Schools for Equity. Unfortunately, I only saw part of it because I had interrupted and couldn't see the whole thing. What I did see was very interesting the direction Schools for Equity is going. They also had a really good presentation from the people that do all the polling for the state, and some interesting numbers in the city polls as far as how people are looking at education and all that.
Yeah, there were two presentations that morning. One was from Justice Allen Page and Bill Shari, and then the other was from Morris Leatherman. And then I attended the C Legislative Committee meeting, and I think I mentioned to you in one of my notes that the C is going to really be looking at trying to hold schools harmless as far as funding is concerned. So looking at enrollment and taking the higher of the two numbers for enrollment for schools that want to put people funding. And you can see that in tonight's presentation from our audit that we're just not getting the same revenue as some of the representatives of the world right now because of our property values. So that's going to be the two main fights for C again, is to get some equity in the revenue and then not holding schools harmless. And I think I'm going to be on that committee, that legislative committee, going forward. Okay, and then at Stearns,
Update with that, I think their insurance had a 17% increase in their renewal rate. When they did leave, they had about 70% increase, so it ended up pretty much being a wash for them last year. And then just general updates about the start of the school year, and I think it's going well for next year so far. Especially with the new building in Sartell. Let's see, and then that budget comparison report. Any questions on that? And then item 9, upcoming events, activities. Again, going forward, our meetings will be building here.
Does this work out for you guys? Feels comfortable and safe and everything?
And you can see, I think, other things coming up, students and family services. Policy committee will be starting month, covering some of that technology, and then we have a school board meeting on the 12th. So that'll be work sessions to discuss more of the vision stuff. Anything else from anybody? Otherwise, the meeting's adjourned.